The key doesn't work anymore. Victoria Sterling stood 7 months pregnant in the driveway of what she thought was her home, watching her husband hand over house keys to his 26-year-old mistress like she was signing for a pizza delivery. 15 years of marriage, gone in the time it takes to change a lock. But Marcus Sterling made one crucial mistake when he threw out his pregnant wife for a younger woman. He assumed Victoria was powerless. He assumed she had nowhere to go. He assumed she'd quietly disappear with whatever scraps he decided to throw her. Marcus Sterling had no idea that his wife had just inherited something that would destroy his entire empire. Something that would expose 15 years of lies, fraud, and crimes that went all the way back to her father's mysterious death 23 years ago. You see, the house Marcus just evicted her from, the mansion he claimed belonged to him, the property his entire billionaire empire was built on, it never belonged to him at all. And when Victoria Sterling discovers the truth about who really owns everything, Marcus is about to learn that throwing away your wife is the most expensive mistake a man can make. This is the story of how a discarded wife became the owner of everything her husband thought he'd stolen from her. And trust me, you don't want to miss how this ends. The key doesn't work anymore. Victoria Sterling stood in the circular driveway of what she thought was her home. The brass key that had opened this door for 15 years now turned uselessly in the lock. 7 months pregnant, her belly straining against the silk blouse she'd worn to her doctor's appointment. She tried the key again. Click. Nothing. Click. Nothing. Thunder rolled across the manicured grounds of the estate. The Georgia heat pressed down on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. Sweat beaded on her forehead as she fumbled with her purse, searching for her phone. The front door opened from the inside. Marcus appeared in the doorway, not meeting her eyes. At 48, her husband still cut an impressive figure in his tailored suit. His dark hair showed just enough silver to make him distinguished rather than old. But something in his posture had changed. His shoulders were set differently, defensive. "I had them changed this morning," he said quietly. "Your things are packed." The words hit her like physical blows. Victoria gripped the car door handle behind her, the metal warm from the sun. "What are you talking about?" Her voice came out smaller than she intended. "Your things," Marcus repeated. He gestured vaguely toward the house. "I've had them packed. The suitcases are by the door." Behind him, movement caught Victoria's eye. A woman appeared in the hallway. Blonde hair that caught the light perfectly, young face with sharp cheekbones, wearing Victoria's favorite silk robe, the cream-colored one with the delicate lace trim that Victoria had bought in Paris on their 10th anniversary. The woman was maybe 26, maybe younger. 15 years, Marcus. Victoria's hand moved instinctively to cover her belly. The baby kicked, as if responding to her stress. 15 years of marriage. Things change, Victoria. People grow apart. Marcus adjusted his Rolex, the one she'd bought him for their 10th anniversary, the one that cost more than most people's cars. Amber and I, we're starting fresh. Amber, the woman had a name. She was real. Victoria felt the first contraction hit, not labor, just her body responding to shock. She breathed through it, counting to 10 the way Dr. Matthews had taught her. "Where am I supposed to go?" she asked. "The Ritz downtown has been arranged. Temporarily. Temporarily." Like their marriage had become. The blonde woman stepped closer to Marcus. She was tiny, maybe 5 feet 2 inches in bare feet. Her skin was flawless, the kind of perfect that came from expensive treatments and youth. She smiled at Victoria with white teeth that probably cost more than Victoria's car. "Hi," Amber said brightly. "I'm Amber Walsh. I've heard so much about you." Victoria stared at this woman who was wearing her robe in her house. "Have you now? Marcus talks about you all the time," Amber continued, oblivious to the ice in Victoria's voice. "He says you're a wonderful mother. Well, you will be. Soon." Her eyes dropped to Victoria's belly with something that might have been envy. "There's something else you need to know." "Victoria," Marcus said. His voice had taken on that tone she remembered from their early years when he was negotiating business deals. Calm, controlled, completely detached. "About the prenup you signed." Victoria's blood turned cold. She remembered signing those papers on their wedding day. She'd been 20 years old, so in love she could barely see straight. Marcus had laughed, called it just paperwork, kissed her forehead. promised it would never matter. The prenup states clearly that in case of divorce, you receive nothing from properties purchased during the marriage. Marcus continued. This house, the vacation homes in Aspen and the Hamptons, the investment properties, they're all in my name. You're telling me this now? Victoria's voice cracked. While I'm pregnant with your child, the timing isn't ideal, but the timing, Victoria laughed, but there was no humor in it. I'm 7 months pregnant. Marcus, your son is due in 8 weeks. About that, Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Behind him, Amber moved closer, slipping her arm through his. Amber and I are planning to start our own family. It's better if we handle the custody arrangements through lawyers. The second contraction hit harder. Victoria leaned against the car, breathing through the pain. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be happening. Are you okay? For just a moment, Marcus's voice carried the old concern. The voice of the man who used to bring her soup when she was sick, who held her hand during scary movies, who cried when she told him she was pregnant. I'm fine, Victoria lied. She wasn't fine. Nothing would ever be fine again. Marcus's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then back at Victoria. I have a conference call in 10 minutes. The driver will take you to the hotel. A uniformed chauffeur materialized as if summoned. He began loading suitcases into the back of a black sedan. Victoria watched her life being packed away by a stranger. 15 years, and she whispered again. I know this is hard, Marcus said, but his eyes were already distant, already moving on to his next appointment, his next life. But we both know this marriage has been over for a while. Had it been Victoria searched her memory, trying to find signs she'd missed, the late nights at the office that had become later, the business trips that stretched longer, the way he'd stopped noticing when she wore new dresses or changed her hair, but she'd thought that was just marriage, just life. The chauffeur held open the car door. Victoria looked at the house one more time, the house where she'd planned to bring home her baby, where she'd spent 3 months setting up the nursery with hand-painted murals and a rocking chair that had belonged to her grandmother. The nursery, she said suddenly. Marcus and Amber exchanged a look. We haven't touched it, Marcus said quickly. Your things from there are packed too. Victoria nodded numbly and got into the car. Through the window, she watched Marcus put his arm around Amber's tiny waist. They looked like they belonged together, young and beautiful and untouched by the messy complications of real life. As the car pulled away, Victoria did what she always did when the world felt out of control. She pulled out her phone and began making a list. Call doctor about stress contractions. Find temporary apartment. Call lawyer about prenup. Figure out how to be a single mother. The list blurred as tears filled her eyes, but she kept writing, creating order in the chaos. It was the only thing that made sense anymore. Behind them, the house where she'd lived for 15 years disappeared around a curve in the long driveway. The house where she'd been a wife, where she'd planned to become a mother. Now she was neither. The Ritz-Carlton suite smelled like expensive furniture polish in other people's lives. Victoria sat on the edge of the king-sized bed, staring at the suitcases the chauffeur had arranged neatly by the window. Her entire married life reduced to 4 pieces of luggage. Room service cartwheels squeaked in the hallway outside her door. Somewhere a phone was ringing. Voices drifted from other rooms, other lives continuing normally while hers fell apart. Her phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca Carter, her best friend since law school. How did the doctor's appointment go? Everything okay with little James? James. They'd chosen the name together just last month, lying in bed on a Sunday morning with baby name books spread between them. Marcus had wanted to name him after his father, but Victoria loved the simple strength of James. Marcus had agreed, saying it sounded presidential. Now Marcus was planning to start over with Amber, a new family. New names chosen in new beds. Victoria's fingers hovered over her phone. How do you text that your husband just threw you out for his 26-year-old mistress? Can you come to the Ritz room 1223? I need to tell you something. The reply came immediately. On my way. 20 minutes. Victoria looked around the suite. Cream walls, gold accents, views of downtown Atlanta through floor-to-ceiling windows. It was beautiful. It was also temporary. Everything in her life had become temporary. She walked to the bathroom, needing to splash cold water on her face. The mirror reflected a woman she barely recognized. Her chestnut hair was still perfectly styled from this morning, but her green eyes looked hollow. Her skin was pale despite the summer heat. At 35, she was still young, still attractive, but pregnant and suddenly single. She felt ancient. The prenup. She tried to remember what else it said, but the details were fuzzy. She'd been so happy on their wedding day, so focused on becoming Mrs. Sterling, that she'd barely read the papers their lawyers put in front of her. Marcus had been 28 then, already showing signs of the business genius that would make him a billionaire by 40. She'd been a promising young real estate attorney with dreams of her own practice someday. They'd met at a charity fundraiser, talked all night about property law and development opportunities. He'd been charming, ambitious. He'd made her feel like she could conquer the world. Instead, she'd given up her career to support his. Moved to Atlanta when his tech company relocated, hosted dinner parties for his business partners, smiled for charity photographers, became the perfect wife for a man building an empire. A sharp knock interrupted her thoughts. Victoria opened the door to find Rebecca standing in the hallway with Thai takeout bags and her laptop bag. Rebecca Carter was everything Victoria wasn't right now. Confident, successful, unmarried by choice. At 32, she was a forensic accountant who specialized in finding hidden assets in divorce cases. Her red hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense bun, her blue eyes sharp with intelligence. "Okay, what's wrong?" Rebecca said the moment she saw Victoria's face. "You look like someone died." "In a way, someone did." Rebecca set the food on the coffee table and really looked at Victoria. Her expression shifted from concern to fury in the space of a heartbeat. "What did Marcus do?" Victoria sank onto the couch, suddenly exhausted. "He threw me out. Today. While I was at my doctor's appointment, he had the locks changed. His mistress was already moved in. What?" Rebecca's voice could have cut glass. "Her name is Amber. She's 26. She was wearing my robe." Rebecca opened her laptop with sharp, angry movements. "Tell me everything. From the beginning." Victoria recounted the scene at the house. Marcus's words about the prenup. Amber's cheerful introduction. With each detail, Rebecca's expression grew darker. "The prenup says I get nothing from properties purchased during the marriage," Victoria finished. "The house, everything. It's all in his name." "That's what Marcus says," Rebecca replied grimly. "But I've been tracking Marcus's companies for months as part of a consultation. Something doesn't add up about his finances." "What do you mean?" Rebecca pulled up spreadsheets on her screen. "His net worth on paper doesn't match his actual liquid assets. He's been moving money around, hiding things in offshore accounts and shell companies." Victoria felt another contraction, stronger this time. She breathed through it, counting slowly. "Are you okay?" Rebecca asked immediately. "Just stress. Dr. Matthews said my blood pressure is elevated. This is exactly why—" Rebecca's voice was fierce. "Throwing out a pregnant woman? What kind of man does that?" The kind of man Victoria had apparently been married to for 15 years without really knowing him. "There's something else," Rebecca continued. "I need to dig deeper, but I think Marcus has been cooking his books. The real estate empire, the property developments, the investment portfolio, none of it adds up to the lifestyle he's been living." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your husband might not be as rich as he claims to be, and I'm saying there might be assets he's hiding from you." Rebecca leaned forward. "Victoria, I need you to think carefully. Your grandmother's estate 5 years ago. Do you remember what properties were included in her inheritance?" Victoria rubbed her temples, trying to focus through the stress and pregnancy brain fog. "There was cash that went into our joint account, maybe $200,000, and some real estate holdings I never really looked at. Marcus said he'd handle the paperwork, make sure everything was properly transferred." "Do you have any of the original documents?" "They should be in the safe at the house." Victoria's laugh was bitter. "The house I can't get into anymore." Rebecca was already making notes. "We'll get copies from your grandmother's estate lawyer." "What was his name?" "Harrison, David Harrison. He handled all of grandmother's legal work. I remember him from law school. Good guy. Still practicing, as far as I know." Rebecca closed her laptop and moved to sit beside Victoria on the couch. "Listen to me. I know this feels like the end of the world right now, but I've seen this kind of thing before. Rich men who think they can throw away their wives like old furniture." "Maybe he's right to throw me away," Victoria said quietly. Maybe I did become old furniture. Don't! Rebecca's voice was sharp. Don't you dare blame yourself for his choices? But Victoria couldn't help wondering. When had she stopped being the woman Marcus fell in love with? When had she become someone he could discard so easily? Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. The custody arrangement will be generous. My lawyers will be in touch. Victoria stared at the message. Even now, hours later, he was still talking about her baby like a business transaction. I don't know how to do this, she whispered. Be a single mother. Start over at 35. You're not starting over, Rebecca said firmly. You're taking back what was always yours, your strength, your intelligence, your life. Marcus didn't give you those things. He can't take them away. Victoria wanted to believe her. But sitting in this hotel room, surrounded by suitcases and takeout containers, she felt like she was drowning. Outside the window, Atlanta sparkled in the evening light. Millions of people going about their lives, unaware that Victoria Sterling's world had ended that afternoon. She pulled out her phone again and did what she always did when overwhelmed. She updated her list, called David Harrison about grandmother's estate, get medical records from Dr. Matthews, find apartment that allows babies, learn how to be alone. The last item made her chest tight with panic. She'd never lived alone. Not really. From her parents' house to college dorms, to the apartment she'd shared with roommates, then straight to marriage with Marcus. At 35, she was about to discover who Victoria Sterling was when no one was watching, when no one needed her to be anything other than herself. The thought terrified her. But as baby James kicked against her ribs, strong and steady, she realized she didn't have a choice. She was about to become someone's mother. That meant she had to figure out how to be someone who could protect him. Starting tonight, Eleanor Sterling arrived at the Ritz the next morning, carrying a small overnight bag and the kind of quiet dignity that comes from 72 years of handling life's disasters with grace. Victoria opened the door to find her mother-in-law standing in the hallway, still elegant despite the early hour. Eleanor's silver hair was perfectly styled, her cream-colored suit spotless, but her usually composed face showed cracks of distress. Victoria, darling, Eleanor said, embracing her carefully. I came as soon as I heard. Mrs. Sterling, you don't need to. Eleanor, please. She pulled back to study Victoria's face. And yes, I do need to, because what my son did yesterday is unconscionable. Victoria had always liked Eleanor, even when the older woman had been reserved during the early years of the marriage. Eleanor came from old Atlanta money, the kind of family that valued tradition and discretion above all else. She'd married Marcus's father for love, stayed with him through his drinking and business failures, and raised Marcus to be better than his father. Apparently, she'd failed on that last point. I had no idea what Marcus was planning, Eleanor continued as Victoria led her into the suite. If I had known, you couldn't have stopped him. Perhaps not, but I could have warned you. Eleanor set her bag down and looked around the hotel room. This is no place for a pregnant woman. It's temporary. Yes, it is, because what I'm about to tell you changes everything. Eleanor pulled out an old manila folder from her bag, the kind lawyers used decades ago. The paper was yellowed at the edges. The string tie faded with age. Your grandmother's estate, Eleanor said, spreading documents across the coffee table. You said you never really looked at the real estate holdings. I think it's time you did. Victoria sank onto the couch, her hands automatically going to her belly. Baby James was active this morning, responding to her stress with constant movement. I don't understand, Victoria said. Your grandmother, God rest her soul, was a very smart woman, smarter than any of us realized. Eleanor's fingers were gentle as she handled the old papers. She purchased several properties in the 70s and 80s, long before the Atlanta real estate boom. Properties that are worth a fortune today? Eleanor pulled out a deed, the legal language dense and formal. Victoria squinted at the tiny print, trying to make sense of the property description. This property, Eleanor pointed to a specific parcel number, 47 acres in Buckhead, purchased in 1978 under the Whitmore Family Trust. Victoria's maiden name was Whitmore. When your grandmother died 5 years ago, this property transferred to you automatically as the sole beneficiary of the trust. Eleanor continued. Do you know what sits on this land now? Victoria felt the world tilt around her. What? The house, Victoria. The house Marcus threw you out of yesterday. The house where you've lived for 15 years. It legally belongs to you. The words didn't make sense. Victoria stared at the deed, at her grandmother's name written in careful script, at the property lines that seemed to encompass everything she'd thought she'd lost. That's impossible, Victoria whispered. Marcus bought that house. We toured it together, made an offer. You made an offer to yourself. Unknowingly, Eleanor said gently. The property was listed through a management company. Marcus never knew the actual owner was his future wife. Victoria's hands shook as she held the deed. Are you sure about this? I've spent all night reviewing documents. The deed is clear. The trust transfer is legal. The property has been yours for 5 years. But Marcus said, the prenup is void if it was signed under false pretenses. Eleanor stated firmly. Marcus knew about your inheritance when you married. He's been living on your property, developing portions of it, using it as collateral for business loans, all without your knowledge or consent. Victoria felt like she was drowning in information that didn't fit together. Why are you telling me this? Eleanor's expression softened. Because I raised my son to be honorable, and he's become something I don't recognize. Because you're carrying my grandchild, and I won't let him be born into a world where his father can destroy his mother with lies. The hotel room door opened. Rebecca entered with coffee and pastries from the lobby cafe, took one look at the documents spread across the table, and set everything down carefully. What's all this? Rebecca asked. Evidence that Victoria's husband is a fraud, Eleanor said crisply. Rebecca sat down and began examining the papers with the trained eye of a forensic accountant. Her expression grew more incredulous with each document. Holy shit, Rebecca breathed, then immediately looked apologetic. Sorry, Mrs. Sterling. Under the circumstances, dear, profanity is appropriate. Victoria watched her best friend and her mother-in-law work through the papers together, cross-referencing deed numbers with property tax records, trust documents with transfer papers. This is incredible, Rebecca said finally. Victoria, do you realize what this means? It means the house is mine, Victoria said slowly, the reality beginning to sink in. It means more than that, Rebecca corrected. Marcus has been developing parts of this property for years. The office complex on the north side, the luxury condos on the east border, the shopping center that's under construction. He's made millions in profits from developments on land you own. Victoria felt dizzy. How much money are we talking about? Rebecca and Eleanor exchanged a look. Conservative estimate, Rebecca said carefully. He owes you approximately $47 million in illegal profits. The number was so large Victoria couldn't process it. $47 million. More money than she'd ever dreamed of having. I don't want his money, Victoria said finally. I just want... She stopped. What did she want? You want security for your child, Eleanor said quietly. You want to never be vulnerable like this again? You want justice. Justice. The word resonated in Victoria's chest like a bell. Her phone rang. Marcus's name appeared on the screen. Victoria stared at it for a long moment, then answered. Victoria, we need to talk. Marcus's voice sounded strained. There's been a misunderstanding about the property documents. What kind of misunderstanding? Legal complications. Nothing we can't work out. Why don't you come to the house this evening? We can discuss everything calmly. Victoria looked at Eleanor, who was shaking her head firmly. I don't think that's a good idea. Marcus, baby, you're being emotional. The pregnancy hormones are affecting your judgment. This is all just paperwork that got mixed up during the estate transfer. Don't you dare dismiss me. Victoria's voice was steel, the same voice she'd used in courtrooms before she gave up her career to support his dreams. I'm not emotional. I'm informed. Silence on the other end of the line. Informed about what? Marcus asked carefully. About the property, Marcus. About my property. About the developments you've been building on land that belongs to me. Another silence. Longer this time. We should definitely meet, Marcus said finally. Tonight, 7 o'clock. No, if you want to talk, we do it through lawyers. Victoria was please. Don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. You made it complicated when you threw out your pregnant wife for your mistress. She hung up before he could respond. Rebecca was grinning. That was beautiful. I need to call David Harrison, Victoria said. I need a lawyer who isn't afraid of Marcus Sterling. Eleanor nodded approvingly. David's a good man. He'll take care of you. As Victoria searched her contacts for David's number, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Power, control, the ability to fight back instead of just enduring. For the first time since yesterday, she wasn't just surviving, she was planning. And Marcus Sterling was about to discover that throwing away his wife was the biggest mistake of his very expensive life. David Harrison hadn't changed much since law school. Still tall at 6 feet 2 inches, still kind, still harboring feelings for Victoria that he'd buried under 20 years of professional courtesy in marriage to other people. His office overlooked Peachtree Street, all dark wood and leather-bound law books, the kind of place that inspired confidence in clients who needed someone to fight their battles. Victoria sat across from his mahogany desk, Eleanor beside her, while David reviewed the estate documents they'd brought. His expression grew more serious with each page. This is extraordinary, David said finally. Victoria, do you understand the legal implications here? Rebecca explained some of it. The house belongs to me through my grandmother's trust. Not just the house, the entire 47-acre parcel. David pulled out a legal pad and began making notes. Marcus has been living there under false ownership for 15 years. He's developed portions of the property without owner consent. He's used it as collateral for business loans without your knowledge. What does that mean legally? David leaned back in his chair, choosing his words carefully. It means the prenup he's hiding behind is void, signed under false pretenses. It means he owes you 15 years of fair market rent. It means every development project on your land becomes your asset, not his. Eleanor smiled grimly. And it means she can evict him. More than that, David continued. If Marcus has been using this property as collateral for business loans, and I suspect he has based on these financial records Rebecca provided, then his entire business empire is potentially built on fraud. Victoria felt another wave of disorientation. Yesterday, she'd been a discarded wife with nothing. Today, she apparently owned her husband's life. I need you to understand something, Victoria, David said gently. This case is going to be complicated. Marcus has excellent lawyers. He'll fight this with everything he has. Let him fight, Eleanor said crisply. We have the truth. David's phone buzzed with an urgent message. He glanced at it, then looked up with surprise. That was my paralegal. Marcus's attorney just requested an emergency meeting. Today, this afternoon. He knows, Victoria realized. Somehow he knows we found the documents. Of course he knows, Eleanor replied. Marcus didn't get where he is by being stupid, just dishonest. Victoria's hands moved instinctively to her belly. The stress was triggering more contractions. Not dangerous, but uncomfortable. Dr. Matthews had warned her about this. Are you okay? David asked, noticing her wince. Just stress contractions. The baby doesn't like all this drama. Then let's finish it quickly, David said firmly. He pulled out his phone. I'm calling Marcus's lawyer right now. We're not meeting on his timeline. Victoria listened as David arranged a conference call for 4 o'clock. His voice was professional but steel-edged. This was the David Harrison she remembered from law school moot court competitions, the one who never lost. After he hung up, David turned to Victoria with an expression she couldn't quite read. Before we go into battle, he said carefully, I need to ask you something personal. Victoria nodded. What do you want from this, really? Beyond the legal technicalities, what does Victoria Sterling want her life to look like when this is over? The question hung in the air. Victoria realized no one had asked her what she wanted in years. Marcus made decisions. She adapted. Marcus chose restaurants. She ate what he ordered. Marcus planned vacations. She packed what he suggested. I want my son to be safe, she said finally. I want to never feel powerless again. I want to wake up in the morning without checking someone else's mood before I decide how to feel. David nodded as if this made perfect sense. And Marcus, he asked gently. Victoria thought about the man she'd loved for 15 years, the man who'd held her hand during her father's funeral, who'd talked about growing old together, who'd seemed genuinely excited about becoming a father. That man had thrown her out yesterday for a woman young enough to be his daughter. I want him to face consequences for his choices, Victoria said quietly. I want him to understand that actions have costs, and I want him to be the kind of father our son can respect, even if I can't respect him as a husband anymore. Eleanor reached over and squeezed Victoria's hand. That's more generous than he deserves. Maybe, but it's what I can live with. David's conference room phone rang at exactly 4 o'clock. Marcus's voice came through the speaker, accompanied by at least two other men Victoria didn't recognize. Victoria, Marcus said, his tone carefully controlled. I'm glad we could arrange this call so quickly. Marcus, her voice was equally controlled. I think there's been some confusion about the property documents, Marcus continued. Some old paperwork from your grandmother's estate that's created unnecessary complications. The only confusion is why you've been living on my property for 15 years without paying rent, Victoria replied calmly. Silence. Then a different voice, older, more formal. Mrs. Sterling, this is James Patterson, Mr. Sterling's lead counsel. I think we can resolve this matter quickly and amicably. David leaned forward toward the speakerphone. David Harrison representing Mrs. Sterling. I don't think there's anything to resolve. The property belongs to my client, has belonged to her for 5 years. Mr. Sterling is essentially a squatter. That's a very inflammatory characterization. Patterson replied smoothly. Mr. Sterling has been maintaining and improving the property in good faith. Without the owner's permission, David countered, which makes those improvements theft, not investment. Victoria listened to the lawyer's fence with words, but she was watching Eleanor's face. Her mother-in-law looked like she was enjoying this. Perhaps we should discuss terms, Patterson said finally. Mr. Sterling is prepared to offer Mrs. Sterling a generous settlement, full custody of the child, substantial monthly support, and a lump sum payment in exchange for a quiet resolution. How much? Victoria asked directly. Another pause. Then Marcus's voice. $5 million. $5 million. A year ago, Victoria would have thought that was all the money in the world. No, she said simply. Victoria, be reasonable, Marcus said, his careful control slipping slightly. $5 million is more than enough to set you up for life. It's not about the money, Marcus. Then what is it about? Victoria looked at David, then at Eleanor, then spoke directly to the phone. It's about the fact that you threw out your pregnant wife to move in your mistress. It's about 15 years of marriage that apparently meant nothing to you. It's about my son learning someday what kind of man his father really is. Victoria, you're being emotional. Stop. Victoria's voice cut through the phone like a blade. Stop dismissing me. Stop treating me like I'm too stupid or too hormonal to understand what's happening. I understand perfectly. She took a deep breath and continued. You've been living on my property, developing my land, using my assets as collateral for your business deals for 15 years, without my knowledge or consent. That's not a misunderstanding. Marcus, that's fraud. That's a very serious accusation, Patterson said carefully. It's not an accusation, David interjected. It's a statement of fact. We have documentation going back 20 years, property deeds, trust transfers, development permits, loan applications, all of it pointing to systematic deception. Victoria felt a strange calm settling over her. For the first time in years, maybe decades, she felt like herself. Not Marcus's wife, not someone's accessory, but Victoria Sterling, attorney at law, fighting for what was right. Here's what's going to happen, she said to the phone. You have 72 hours to remove all personal belongings from my property. Both of you. All business operations on the land cease immediately. All profits from developments on my land for the past 15 years will be calculated and repaid. Victoria, this is insane, Marcus said, his voice rising. You can't just destroy everything we built together. We didn't build it together. Marcus, you built it on land that belonged to me without telling me. While I supported your dreams and gave up my own career, she paused, feeling the baby kick strongly against her ribs. The marriage is over, but our son deserves better than this. Figure out how to be the kind of man he can look up to, and maybe we can discuss reasonable custody arrangements. And if I refuse? Marcus asked. Victoria looked at David, who nodded encouragingly. Then my lawyers will file criminal charges for property fraud, theft, and breach of fiduciary duty. The media will have a field day with the billionaire who threw out his pregnant wife and stole her inheritance. Another long silence. This isn't over, Marcus said finally. Yes, it is, Victoria replied. It was over the moment you chose her over your family. The line went dead. Victoria sat back in her chair, emotionally drained but oddly exhilarated. Eleanor was beaming at her with obvious pride. That, Eleanor said, was magnificent. David was making notes on his legal pad. They'll be back with a better offer, probably 10 million, maybe 15. I don't want his money, Victoria said again. Then what do you want? David asked gently. Victoria thought about it for a long moment. What did she want? I want my house back, she said finally. I want to raise my son where he belongs. And I want Marcus to understand that throwing people away has consequences. David nodded. Then that's what we'll get you. As they gathered the documents and prepared to leave, Victoria felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Hope. Not the fragile hope of a woman waiting for someone else to save her, but the solid hope of someone who had just saved herself. Marcus Sterling was about to learn that his biggest mistake wasn't leaving his wife. It was underestimating her. The photographs appeared in the Atlanta Journal-Constitution the next morning. Victoria, 7 months pregnant, standing outside the Ritz-Carlton with her lawyer and mother-in-law. The headline read, Tech Billionaire's Pregnant Wife Claims Fraud in Property Empire. Rebecca called at 7 a.m., her voice tight with excitement. Have you seen the news? Victoria was already dressed and drinking decaf coffee in the hotel suite. Eleanor beside her reviewing more legal documents they'd retrieved from David's contacts at the courthouse. We saw it, Victoria replied. This is just the beginning, Rebecca continued. I've been up all night digging through Marcus's financial records. It's worse than we thought. How much worse? He's leveraged everything against that property. Victoria, the office building downtown, the vacation rental portfolio, the tech company headquarters, the private jet, even the yacht. It's all connected to your grandmother's land. Victoria felt dizzy. All of it, conservative estimate. If you demand immediate repayment of all illegal profits plus interest, Marcus Sterling's net worth drops from 800 million to maybe 50 million. And that's if he can liquidate fast enough to avoid bankruptcy. Eleanor looked up from her papers. 50 million is still more than most people see in a lifetime. But it's not billionaire money, Rebecca pointed out. It's not private jet and multiple homes money. It's not enough to maintain the lifestyle he's been selling to Amber. Victoria's phone started ringing. Marcus's name on the screen. She let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again and again. Maybe you should answer, Eleanor suggested. On the fourth call, Victoria picked up. What, Marcus? Victoria, we need to talk. In person. Right now. His voice was strained, desperate in a way she'd never heard before. We talked yesterday. Through lawyers. Nothing's changed. Everything's changed. The media, the stock prices. My business partners are panicking. You're destroying everything I've worked for. I'm not destroying anything. I'm reclaiming what was always mine. Baby, please, I made a mistake. A terrible mistake. But we can fix this. Baby. He hadn't called her that in months. There is no we anymore. Marcus. What about Amber? Victoria asked, surprising herself with the directness of the question. A long pause. Amber. Amber is young. She doesn't understand the complexities of marriage, of real life. She understood enough to move into my house while I was at the doctor. That wasn't her idea. Victoria almost laughed. You're blaming a 26-year-old for your choices. I'm not blaming anyone. I'm trying to fix this. For our son. Our son will be fine. He'll grow up knowing his mother fought for what was right. Victoria, listen to me. The lawyers, the media attention, the property disputes. This is going to get ugly. Really ugly. Are you prepared for that in your condition? There it was. The subtle threat wrapped in concern. The same manipulation Marcus had been using for years. So smoothly she'd often missed it entirely. Are you threatening me? I'm warning you. This kind of legal battle takes years. Millions in attorney fees. Public scrutiny of every aspect of our marriage. Do you want our son born into that kind of chaos? Victoria looked at Eleanor, who was shaking her head firmly. The only chaos is the mess you created by lying to me for 15 years. I never lied to you. You lived on my property without telling me it was mine. You developed my land without my permission. You used my assets as collateral without my knowledge. What would you call that, silence? I would call it marriage, Marcus said finally. Husbands and wives share assets. Make decisions together. We didn't make decisions together. You made decisions, and I found out about them later. Sometimes years later, Victoria's voice was getting stronger with each exchange. She was finding the woman she used to be, before she'd become so careful about Marcus's moods, so focused on keeping peace. One more time, and she continued, remove your belongings from my property. All business operations cease. We'll calculate damages and repayment through the courts. And if I refuse, then tomorrow's headline will be about criminal charges. She hung up before he could respond. Eleanor was smiling at her with obvious pride. Your grandmother would be so proud of you right now. Would she? Oh yes, Martha Whitmore never backed down from a fight when she knew she was right. You're exactly like her. Victoria tried to picture her grandmother at 35, making hard choices, protecting her family. The woman who'd been smart enough to buy land in Buckhead before anyone knew it would become Atlanta's most valuable real estate. The woman whose foresight was now protecting her granddaughter and great-grandson. David called at 9 a.m. with updates from Marcus's legal team. They've made a new offer, he said. $20 million in joint custody. Still no. Victoria, that's a life-changing amount of money. My life already changed. Yesterday, when I discovered who I married, David was quiet for a moment. There's something else. Marcus's business partners are demanding an emergency board meeting. Stock prices for Sterling Tech have dropped 30% since the news broke. Good, Victoria said, then immediately felt guilty for the viciousness in her voice. The offer will go higher, David warned, but the pressure will get more intense too. As if summoned by his words, Victoria's phone rang again. This time the name on the screen made her stomach clench. Dr. Matthews. Mrs. Sterling, I need you to come in today. Your blood pressure readings from yesterday's appointment are concerning. Victoria's hand went instinctively to her belly. Is the baby okay? The baby's fine for now, but stress-induced hypertension can become dangerous quickly in the third trimester. We need to monitor you closely. After she hung up, Eleanor was studying her with worried eyes. You need to rest, Eleanor said firmly. This legal battle will still be here tomorrow. I can't rest. Not while Marcus is trying to manipulate me into giving up. Then let me handle some of it. Eleanor pulled out her own phone. I still have friends in this city. People who remember what Atlanta was like before Marcus Sterling arrived with his money and his arrogance. Victoria wanted to argue, but another contraction hit, stronger than the ones she'd been having. Dr. Matthews was right. The stress was affecting the baby. What can I do to help? Rebecca asked, closing her laptop. Keep digging through his finances. Find everything he's hidden, every shell company, every offshore account, every development deal. Already on it. I've got 3 forensic accountants working on this pro bono. Apparently, a lot of people in this city don't like Marcus Sterling as much as he thinks they do. Victoria closed her eyes and tried to imagine a world where this was over, where she was raising James in the house that legally belonged to them, where Marcus was just a weekend father who paid child support and stayed out of her daily life. The fantasy felt impossible and inevitable at the same time. Her phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. This is Amber. We need to talk. It's important. Victoria stared at the message. What could Marcus's mistress possibly have to say that Victoria would want to hear? But curiosity won. She texted back, talk about what? The response came immediately. About Marcus, and the things he's been hiding from both of us. Victoria showed the message to Eleanor and Rebecca. It's a trap, Eleanor said immediately. Probably, Rebecca agreed. But it might also be an opportunity. Victoria thought about the young woman she'd seen in her robe, in her house. Amber had seemed confident, even cheerful. But what if that was all an act? What if she was as much a victim of Marcus's manipulation as Victoria had been? Where do you want to meet? Victoria texted back. The response was immediate. Starbucks on Peachtree. 1 hour. Come alone. Victoria looked at Eleanor and Rebecca. I'm going. Absolutely not, Eleanor said firmly. You're 7 months pregnant and under stress orders. Rebecca added, meeting the mistress is not what the doctor meant by reducing stress, but Victoria was already reaching for her purse. For the first time in her marriage, and she was making decisions based on what she thought was right, not on what would keep everyone else comfortable. I need to know what she knows, Victoria said. And I need to look her in the eye when she tells me, Eleanor sighed. Then we're coming with you. She said come alone. She's 26 and sleeping with a married man, Eleanor replied crisply. Her judgment is already questionable. You're not meeting her alone. As they prepared to leave the hotel, Victoria caught sight of herself in the mirror, still pregnant, still tired, but something in her expression had changed. She looked like a woman who had stopped asking permission for her own life. Marcus Sterling had created this situation when he threw her out for a younger woman. Now he was going to live with the consequences of underestimating both of them. Amber Walsh looked younger in person than she had from a distance. Sitting alone at a corner table in Starbucks, she seemed almost fragile. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, her makeup minimal. She wore jeans and a sweater that probably cost more than most people's car payments. But the designer clothes couldn't hide the nervous energy radiating from her small frame. Victoria approached the table with Eleanor and Rebecca flanking her like bodyguards. Amber looked up, her blue eyes widening with something that might have been relief. Thank you for coming, Amber said quietly. I wasn't sure you would. I wasn't sure I would either, Victoria replied, settling carefully into the chair across from her. At 7 months pregnant, every movement required planning. Eleanor and Rebecca took seats at a nearby table, close enough to intervene but far enough to give the illusion of privacy. You said this was about Marcus, Victoria said without preamble. And things he's been hiding from both of us. Amber's hands trembled slightly as she wrapped them around her coffee cup. I don't know how to start this conversation. Start with the truth. Amber nodded, taking a shaky breath. Marcus told me you were separated, that you'd been living apart for months, that the marriage was over, but you were waiting until after the baby was born to make it official. Victoria had been expecting lies about seduction and true love. She hadn't expected this. He told you we were separated. He said you were staying at your sister's house in Savannah, that you'd agreed to keep up appearances for business reasons until after the birth. Amber's voice was barely above a whisper. He said you knew about me, that you were okay with it. The manipulation was breathtaking in its scope. Victoria felt sick. I don't have a sister, Victoria said quietly. And I found out about you when I came home from my doctor's appointment yesterday to find you wearing my robe. Amber's face crumpled. Oh God, I'm so sorry. How long? Victoria asked. 3 months. Amber wiped her eyes with a paper napkin. We met at a business conference in Miami. He was charming, intelligent, successful, everything I thought I wanted. And you moved in immediately. Not immediately, but he said you'd left him, that he was lonely, that the house felt empty without family in it. Amber's laugh was bitter. I thought I was helping him heal from a broken marriage. Victoria studied the younger woman's face. Amber seemed genuinely devastated by the revelation, but Victoria had learned not to trust appearances where Marcus was concerned. Why are you telling me this? Victoria asked. Amber pulled out her phone, swiped to a recording app, and set it on the table between them. Because of this, she said, pressing play. Marcus's voice filled the space between them, tinny through the phone's speaker, but unmistakably his. The property situation is more complicated than I initially explained. Victoria's grandmother left some assets that create legal ambiguities. A different voice, older. What kind of ambiguities? The house, some of the development deals. They're technically tied to trust funds Victoria inherited, but she doesn't understand the business implications. She never has. Victoria's hands clenched into fists under the table. Marcus's voice continued. The important thing is to keep her emotional. Keep her focused on the personal betrayal rather than the financial details. Pregnant women are naturally irrational. Her lawyers will advise her to settle quickly rather than risk a prolonged court battle in her condition. The recording cut off. Amber was watching Victoria's face with obvious anxiety. When was this recorded? Victoria asked, her voice deadly calm. Last night, after your phone call. He thought I was asleep, but I was in the bathroom. I heard him talking to someone, so Amber gestured helplessly at the phone. I don't know why I recorded it. Instinct. Maybe. Victoria felt something cold and sharp settle in her chest. Not heartbreak this time. Something harder. More final. There's more, Amber continued, about the business deals, the properties, the money he's been hiding. What about it? He's been using me. Amber's voice was steady now, resigned. My father owns construction companies in Florida and South Carolina. Marcus has been setting up development deals through my family's businesses, using our corporate accounts to hide profits from the IRS. Victoria leaned forward. Are you saying he's been laundering money through your family? I'm saying my father is about to be investigated for tax evasion because of deals he didn't even know were questionable. Amber's eyes blazed with sudden fury. Marcus destroyed my relationship with my family. They trusted him because they trusted me. The scope of Marcus's deception was staggering. Not just the property fraud, not just the fake separation story, but an entire network of financial manipulation involving people who'd done nothing wrong except trust him. Why should I believe you? Victoria asked. Amber reached into her purse and pulled out a folder thick with documents. Bank statements, construction contracts, email chains. Everything I could gather in the past 24 hours. Victoria flipped through the papers. Even with her legal background, the financial structures were complex, but the pattern was clear. Money flowing from Marcus's developments into shell companies, then into accounts controlled by Amber's family businesses, then back to accounts controlled by Marcus. He's been using you too, Victoria realized. Just like he used you. Just like he probably uses everyone. Amber's voice was bitter. I thought I was special. I thought he chose me. He did choose you. He chose you to be his scapegoat when the investigations start. Amber nodded miserably. My father could go to prison. My mother's health isn't good, and the stress is killing her. My little brother is in college on scholarships that could be revoked if our family's involved in a financial scandal. Victoria felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for this woman who'd been as manipulated as she had been, just in different ways. What do you want from me? Victoria asked. Help, information, evidence that can prove my family didn't know what Marcus was really doing. Amber leaned forward desperately. I know I don't deserve your help. I know I'm partially responsible for what happened to you. You're not responsible for Marcus's choices. I should have asked more questions. I should have insisted on meeting you, on knowing the real situation. Victoria thought about that. Would she have asked more questions at 26? Would she have had the experience to recognize manipulation that sophisticated? Maybe, Victoria said finally. But Marcus is very good at making people believe what he wants them to believe. Amber's phone buzzed with a text message. She glanced at it and went pale. He's looking for me. He wants to know where I am. Victoria made a decision that surprised her. Come with us. What? To the hotel. Bring everything you have on his business dealings. Help us put together a complete picture of what he's been doing. Why would you help me? Victoria thought about it for a moment. Because Mark is counting on us hating each other. Because he's assuming we'll be so focused on fighting over him that we won't compare notes about his lies. She paused, feeling the baby kick strongly against her ribs. And because my son is going to grow up in this world, I want it to be a world where people face consequences for their choices. Eleanor and Rebecca approached the table, having obviously been listening to enough of the conversation to understand what was happening. Are we adopting strays now? Eleanor asked her, but her voice was kind. Just evening the odds, Victoria replied. As they gathered their things and prepared to leave, Amber grabbed Victoria's arm gently. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I'm sorry for everything. For believing him. For moving into your house. For being part of this mess. Victoria looked at this young woman who'd been used as thoroughly as she had been, just with different promises and different lies. We'll figure it out, Victoria said. Together. For the first time since this nightmare began, Victoria felt like she wasn't fighting alone. Marcus Sterling had made enemies of two women who should have been rivals. Now they were allies, and he was about to discover that was a much more dangerous situation for him. The hotel suite felt crowded with 3 women, dozens of documents, 2 laptops, and the weight of 15 years of lies being unraveled in real time. Amber sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by bank statements and construction contracts. Rebecca was at the desk, her fingers flying across her laptop keyboard as she traced money through increasingly complex corporate structures. Eleanor perched on the couch beside Victoria, reading legal documents with the sharp focus of someone who'd spent decades managing family assets. It was nearly midnight. Victoria should have been sleeping, but every time she closed her eyes, she saw Marcus's face from yesterday morning, the casual way he'd dismissed 15 years of marriage, the easy cruelty of throwing her out while she was pregnant. "This is incredible," Rebecca said for the fifth time that evening. "Victoria, he's been stealing from you for 15 years, but it's so much more than just the property." "How much more?" Rebecca turned her laptop screen toward the group. "Remember how you said the inheritance cash went into your joint accounts?" Victoria nodded. "It never made it to the joint accounts. Marcus intercepted it, invested it in his first major development deal, then used the profits to buy the other properties. Essentially, he used your grandmother's money to build his entire empire." The number on the screen made Victoria feel dizzy. $200,000 in 1995, invested in Atlanta real estate before the boom, compounded over 15 years. "That initial investment is worth approximately $87 million today," Rebecca continued. "And that's just the conservative estimate." "87 million," Victoria whispered. "Plus the profits from all the developments on your land, plus the rent he should have been paying you, plus interest and penalties." Rebecca's voice was grim. "We're looking at over $200 million in damages." Amber looked up from her pile of papers. "There's more. The offshore accounts, the shell companies in the Cayman Islands, the Swiss bank deposits. He's been hiding money from the IRS for years." Eleanor set down the legal document she'd been reading. "This isn't just fraud anymore. This is organized financial crime." Victoria's hands moved instinctively to her belly. The baby had been restless all evening, responding to her stress with constant movement. Another contraction hit, stronger than usual. "I need some air," Victoria said, struggling to her feet. The hotel balcony overlooked downtown Atlanta, lights sparkling in the humid night air. Victoria gripped the railing and tried to process the scope of what they'd discovered. Marcus hadn't just thrown her away for a younger woman. He'd been systematically stealing from her for their entire marriage, using her love and trust to fund a lifestyle built on lies. The sliding door opened behind her. Amber stepped onto the balcony, wrapping her arms around herself against the night chill. "Are you okay?" Amber asked. "I don't know." Victoria's voice was barely above a whisper. "I keep thinking about all the times he made me feel like I was being unreasonable when I asked questions about money. All the times he convinced me I didn't understand business, that I should focus on being a good wife and let him handle the complicated stuff." "He did the same thing to me," Amber said quietly. "Made me feel like I was too young to understand, too inexperienced to have opinions about his decisions." Victoria turned to look at the younger woman. In the city lights, Amber looked even younger, almost childlike. "How old are you, really, when you're 24? Amber admitted. "I lied when I said 26. Marcus told me to lie about my age. Said people would take me more seriously if they thought I was older." 24. Victoria felt sick. When she was 24, she just graduated law school. Still believed the world was fair. Still thought love was enough to protect you from people who wanted to hurt you. "What happened to your family?" Victoria asked. "Really?" Amber's eyes filled with tears. "My father had a heart attack yesterday. The stress of the investigations, the possibility of criminal charges, the shame of thinking he'd been involved in tax evasion. He's in intensive care." "Oh, Amber. My mother blames me." "She's right to blame me. I brought Marcus into their lives, vouched for his character, convinced them to trust him with business deals they never would have considered otherwise." Victoria felt another contraction, this one sharp enough to make her gasp. She gripped the balcony railing, breathing through the pain. "We should go inside," Amber said. "You need to rest." "I can't rest. Not until this is finished." "Then let me help finish it." Back inside, Rebecca had found something new. Her face was pale as she looked up from her laptop. "I've been tracking the most recent financial movements," Rebecca said. "Marcus has been liquidating assets all day, moving money to accounts outside U.S. jurisdiction." "He's running," Eleanor said flatly. "It looks like it. Private jet filed a flight plan for tomorrow morning. Destination Switzerland." Victoria stared at the screen showing Marcus's travel arrangements. He's leaving the country with about $50 million in liquid assets, Rebecca confirmed. Enough to disappear permanently if he's careful. The betrayal was complete. Not only had Marcus stolen from her, not only had he thrown her out for another woman, but now he was planning to abandon their unborn son entirely. Victoria's phone rang. Marcus's name on the screen. She answered on speakerphone. Victoria, I need to see you tonight. It's important. His voice sounded different, desperate. Gone was the controlled businessman from earlier calls. I'm listening. Not over the phone. Meet me at the house. Our house. One last time. It's not our house. Marcus, it's my house. It always was. Please. 1 hour. There are things I need to explain. Things you need to understand before you make decisions you'll regret. Victoria looked around the room at the evidence of his crime spread across every surface. What could you possibly say that would change anything? I can tell you about your father. The words hit Victoria like a physical blow. Her father had died in a car accident when she was 12. What could Marcus possibly know about that? What about my father? Meet me and I'll tell you, but not over the phone. Some secrets are too dangerous for electronic communication. Victoria's hands were shaking. Eleanor was shaking her head vigorously. Rebecca was making slashing motions across her throat, and Amber was mouthing the word trap. But Victoria needed to know. After 15 years of lies, she needed to understand all of them. 1 hour, she said. I'll be there. She hung up before anyone could stop her. This is insane, Rebecca said immediately. You're 7 months pregnant. He's desperate, and he's proven he's capable of anything. I'll go with you, Eleanor said firmly. No, this is between Marcus and me. Victoria, he's dangerous, Amber said quietly. You don't know what he's capable of when he's cornered. But Victoria was already reaching for her car keys. Something about the mention of her father had awakened a fury she didn't know she possessed. 15 years, she said to the room. 15 years of him knowing things about my life, my family, my inheritance that I didn't know myself. 15 years of him making me feel stupid for asking questions he knew I had every right to ask. She looked around the room at the 3 women who'd spent the evening helping her piece together the scope of Marcus's deception. I'm going to end this tonight, one way or another. As she walked toward the door, Victoria felt another contraction, stronger than any before. But she also felt something else she hadn't experienced in years. Absolute clarity about who she was and what she deserved. Marcus Sterling was about to face the woman he'd underestimated for 15 years, and she was done being underestimated. The house looked different at night. Imposing shadows fell across the circular driveway, and the Georgian columns that had always seemed elegant now looked like prison bars. Victoria sat in her car for a long moment, gathering courage. The front door opened before she could knock. Marcus stood silhouetted against the light from the foyer, and for a moment Victoria was struck by how much older he looked. The past 3 days had carved new lines around his eyes, and his usually perfect hair was disheveled. Thank you for coming, he said quietly. Victoria stepped inside, her hand automatically moving to support her belly. The baby was active tonight, responding to her elevated heart rate with constant movement. The house smelled different. Amber's perfume lingered in the air, expensive and floral. Evidence of her brief residence remained everywhere: designer shoes by the door, a purse on the hall table, magazines Victoria had never bought scattered on the coffee table. Where is she? Victoria asked. Amber left this afternoon, went back to her family in Florida. Victoria almost mentioned that Amber was actually at the Ritz helping to document Marcus's crimes, then decided information was power. Let him think he knew where everyone was. You said you had something to tell me about my father. Marcus gestured toward the living room. Sit down, please. Victoria remained standing. Just tell me. Marcus ran his hands through his hair, a gesture she'd seen thousands of times during their marriage. Usually it meant he was about to ask for something he knew she didn't want to give. Your father's accident, Marcus began carefully. It wasn't random. Victoria's blood turned cold. What do you mean he was investigating something? A real estate development deal that involved fraud, money laundering, connections to organized crime? He was getting close to exposing people who had a lot to lose. That's impossible. My father was an insurance adjuster. He was also a part-time investigative journalist, working on a story about corruption in Atlanta's construction industry. Marcus's voice was gentle, the same tone he'd used when he told her about her grandmother's death. The car accident happened 2 days before he was supposed to meet with federal investigators. Victoria sank onto the couch without realizing she'd moved. You're lying. I wish I was. Marcus pulled out a manila folder from his briefcase. I hired private investigators 5 years ago, when your grandmother's inheritance came to light. I wanted to understand the full scope of your family's assets. He handed her the folder. Inside were photographs, police reports, newspaper clippings, and documents she'd never seen before. Her father's handwriting on pages of notes about construction companies, permit irregularities, city officials taking bribes. Why are you showing me this now? Victoria's voice was barely a whisper. Because some of the companies your father was investigating are still in business, still operating, still dangerous. Marcus sat on the edge of the coffee table facing her. Victoria, if you pursue this property lawsuit, if you expose all the financial connections, you'll be investigating the same corruption network that killed your father. Victoria stared at the photographs of her father. He looked young in these pictures, maybe 45, the same age Marcus was now. Her father had been trying to expose criminals, trying to do the right thing, just like she was trying to do now. Are you threatening me? She asked quietly. I'm trying to protect you and our son. By stealing from me for 15 years, Marcus leaned forward, his eyes intense. I never stole from you. Everything I built for us, for our family. You built it on my land with my money without telling me. I built it to keep you safe from the people who killed your father. Victoria felt like the room was spinning. What are you talking about? The inheritance from your grandmother. It wasn't just money and property. It was evidence. Documents your father had hidden before he died. Proof of the corruption he was investigating. Marcus pulled out another folder, thicker than the first. Your grandmother knew your father was in danger. When he died, she took everything he'd gathered and hid it in safety deposit boxes, corporate accounts, property trusts. She scattered the evidence across a dozen different legal entities to protect it. Victoria opened the second folder. Bank records, construction contracts, photographs of city officials taking envelopes of cash, recorded conversations between developers and politicians. When you inherited her estate, you didn't just inherit money, Marcus continued. You inherited the most dangerous information in Atlanta. So you decided to hide it from me. I decided to bury it so deep no one would ever find it. I used your money to buy legitimacy, to build relationships with the right people, to make sure you were protected. Victoria stared at him in disbelief. You built an empire on blood money and convinced yourself you were protecting me. I was protecting you, and our son. Do you think it's a coincidence that I wanted children now, after 15 years? Do you think it's a coincidence that I'm liquidating assets and planning to leave the country? Another contraction hit, stronger than before. Victoria doubled over, breathing through the pain. Victoria, are you okay? No, I'm not okay. I'm 7 months pregnant. I just found out my father was murdered. And you're telling me my inheritance is evidence of organized crime? Marcus moved to sit beside her on the couch. For a moment, he was the man she'd fallen in love with, concerned and protective. Come with me, he said quietly. Tonight, the plane leaves at 6 a.m. We can disappear, start over somewhere safe. Switzerland has excellent medical care, excellent schools. Our son can grow up without this shadow over his life. What about Amber? Marcus's expression flickered. Amber was a mistake, a way to create distance between us so you'd be angry enough to leave willingly. I thought if you hated me, you'd be easier to convince to run away with me. Victoria stared at him. You used her, just like you used me. I protected you, both of you, by lying to us, by manipulating us, by making us complicit in crimes we didn't even know were happening. Victoria struggled to her feet, another contraction making her gasp. This doesn't change anything. Marcus, you still stole from me. You still threw me out for another woman? You still made me feel like I was crazy for asking questions about my own life. Victoria, if you expose this, people will die. Maybe you, maybe our son. Then we face it together, as partners, with honesty. Marcus shook his head. It's too late for honesty. It's never too late for honesty. Victoria walked toward the door. each step deliberate despite the pain in her back and the tightness in her belly. Where are you going? To the hospital, and then to the FBI. Victoria, you don't understand what you're doing. She turned back to face him. I understand perfectly. My father died trying to expose corruption. You used his work, and his death, and my grief to build an empire of lies. She paused at the door. But you forgot something. Marcus, you forgot that I'm his daughter. And his work isn't finished. As Victoria walked to her car, she felt the strongest contraction yet. Not Braxton Hicks this time. Real labor, brought on by stress and shock and the weight of 15 years of deception finally crashing down on her. But as she drove toward the hospital, she also felt something else. Purpose. Her father had died fighting for the truth. She was going to finish what he started, even if it killed her. The contractions were coming every 3 minutes by the time Victoria reached the hospital. She called Eleanor from the parking lot, her voice tight with pain and determination. I'm in labor, and I know everything. Eleanor arrived as Victoria was being wheeled into the maternity ward. Rebecca and Amber were right behind her, carrying laptops and boxes of documents like the world's most unusual birth support team. This is highly irregular, Dr. Matthews said, eyeing the entourage. Hospital policy limits visitors during labor. They're not visitors, Victoria gasped between contractions. They're witnesses. The labor and delivery room became an impromptu war room. Between contractions, Victoria gave instructions to Rebecca about which federal agencies to contact, which documents to prioritize, which evidence would be most crucial for prosecution. Call David Harrison, Victoria told Eleanor during a brief respite between pains. Tell him about the corruption investigation. Tell him we need FBI protection, not just lawyers. Victoria, you should focus on having this baby, Dr. Matthews said firmly. I am focusing on having this baby. I want him born into a world where his father faces consequences for his choices. At 2:37 a.m., James Marcus Sterling entered the world weighing 6 pounds, 8 ounces. He was healthy, perfect, and absolutely furious about being disturbed. Victoria held her son for the first time while Rebecca made encrypted phone calls to federal investigators, and Eleanor coordinated with David Harrison's emergency legal team. He's beautiful, Amber said softly, tears streaming down her face. He looks like you. Victoria studied her son's tiny features. He had Marcus's dark hair but her stubborn chin. His eyes were the deep blue that all newborns have, but she had a feeling they'd turn green like hers. He looks like himself, Victoria said finally. That's what matters. Dr. Matthews finished the post-delivery procedures and stepped back. Everything looks good. You did excellent work. Victoria, we're not done yet. At 4 a.m., while James slept peacefully in Victoria's arms, federal agents arrived at the hospital. They were led by Agent Sarah Chen, a specialist in financial crimes who looked like she'd been awake for days. Mrs. Sterling, we understand you have information about a corruption investigation that was started by your father 23 years ago. Victoria nodded toward the boxes of documents Rebecca had organized by the window. Everything's there. Property records, financial statements, recorded conversations, photographs, plus the new evidence we've gathered about my husband's money laundering operation. Agent Chen's eyebrows rose. Your husband is involved in the same corruption network your father was investigating. My husband built his empire using my father's evidence and my inheritance money. He's been laundering profits through shell companies for 15 years. Victoria adjusted James in her arms, marveling at how natural it felt to hold him. He told me tonight that he was protecting me from dangerous people, but he was working with them the whole time. Agent Chen began examining the documents while her team set up recording equipment. Mrs. Sterling, this is going to require extensive testimony from you. Are you prepared for that kind of scrutiny while you have a newborn? I'm prepared for whatever it takes to finish my father's work. At 6 a.m., as Atlanta morning light filtered through the hospital room windows, Victoria's phone rang, Marcus's name on the screen. Agent Chen nodded for her to answer, gesturing to the recording equipment now monitoring all communications. Victoria, where are you? I went to the hotel, but you weren't there. I'm at the hospital. I had the baby. Silence. Then, is he okay? Are you okay? For just a moment, Marcus sounded like the man she'd fallen in love with. Concerned, protective, genuinely caring about their child. We're both fine. He's beautiful. Marcus, he has your hair. I want to see him. I want to see both of you. Victoria looked at Agent Chen, who shook her head firmly. That's not possible right now. Victoria, the plane leaves in 2 hours. Last chance to come with me. To keep our son safe. He's already safe. Safer than he's ever been. You don't understand what you've started. The people involved in this, they don't just prosecute you, they eliminate you. Then it's a good thing I have federal protection now. Another silence. Longer this time. You called the FBI, Marcus said finally. Not a question. I called everyone. FBI, IRS, SEC, Atlanta Police Department, Channel 2 News. Victoria's voice was steady despite the exhaustion. Your plane isn't going anywhere. Marcus, there are federal marshals at the airport. Victoria, you've killed us both, and our son. I've freed us all. From you, from your lies, from the corruption that killed my father. The line went dead. Agent Chen looked up from the documents she'd been reviewing. Mrs. Sterling, this evidence is extraordinary. If we can verify everything here, we're looking at RICO charges, conspiracy, murder, money laundering. This could bring down half the construction industry in Atlanta. Good, Victoria said simply. Eleanor moved to the window, looking out at the city skyline. Marcus was right about one thing. This won't be easy. There will be threats, legal challenges, people who want to discredit your testimony. Let them try. Victoria looked down at James, who was starting to wake up, making the soft, mewling sounds newborns make when they're hungry. My father died fighting these people. I'm not going to dishonor his memory by hiding from them. Rebecca closed her laptop and moved to sit beside the hospital bed. The financial evidence alone is enough to convict Marcus. The corruption network will take longer to unravel, but the foundation is solid. What happens to Marcus now? Amber asked quietly. Agent Chen answered. If he's smart, he'll surrender voluntarily and cooperate with the investigation. If he runs, he becomes an international fugitive with no access to his assets. Victoria's phone buzzed with a text message. Unknown number. This is Amber's father. Thank you for what you're doing. Marcus destroyed our family, but you're giving us a chance to make it right. Victoria showed the message to Amber, who started crying again. He's okay, Amber asked. Better than okay. He's going to testify against Marcus willingly. Apparently, Marcus made the mistake of threatening him yesterday when he realized Amber had turned against him. Dr. Matthews returned with discharge papers and feeding instructions. You can go home this afternoon if you want, but I recommend rest for at least a week. Home, Victoria repeated. The word felt foreign. Where was home now? Eleanor seemed to read her thoughts. Home is where it's always been, darling. The house that belongs to you and James. What about Amber's things? Amber looked up from the chair where she'd been dozing. I don't want anything from that house. Everything there belongs to you. Victoria studied the young woman who'd been as manipulated by Marcus as she had been. Where will you go? Back to Florida. Help my family deal with the legal mess. Try to rebuild. Amber managed a small smile. Maybe go back to school. Finish my degree in something that has nothing to do with business or older men. Good plan. At noon, federal marshals arrived with news that Marcus had been arrested at the airport. He'd attempted to board his private jet with $53 million in bearer bonds and cryptocurrency wallets. He lawyered up immediately, Agent Chen reported, but his legal team is already putting out feelers about a plea deal. Victoria felt a strange emptiness at the news. 15 years of marriage, reduced to arrest warrants and plea negotiations. What kind of plea deal? Eleanor asked. Depends on how cooperative he is. Full confession and testimony against the corruption network could reduce his sentence significantly. But he's looking at minimum 10 years in federal prison. 10 years. James would be 10 years old when his father got out of prison. Old enough to understand why his father was gone. Old enough to ask difficult questions about family history. Victoria made a mental note to start therapy immediately. Not just for herself, but to prepare for the conversation she'd need to have with her son about his father's choices. Mrs. Sterling, Agent Chen continued. We're going to need you to stay in Atlanta for the foreseeable future. The investigation will take months, possibly years. Are you prepared for that level of commitment? Victoria looked around the hospital room. Eleanor, still elegant and supportive. Rebecca, fiercely loyal and brilliant. Amber, young and damaged but trying to do the right thing. James, perfect and innocent, depending on her to create a safe world for him to grow up in. I'm not going anywhere, Victoria said firmly. This is our home, our fight, our chance to make sure what happened to my father never happens to anyone else. Agent Chen smiled for the first time since she'd arrived. Then we're going to make a very strong case. As the afternoon wore on and preparations were made for Victoria's discharge, she found herself thinking about the woman she'd been just 4 days ago. Pregnant, scared, financially dependent, afraid to ask too many questions. That woman was gone. In her place was someone harder, smarter, more dangerous to people who thought they could manipulate vulnerable women. Are you ready to go home? Eleanor asked, gathering the flowers and cards that had somehow appeared during Victoria's brief hospital stay. Victoria looked down at James, who was sleeping peacefully despite the chaos surrounding his first day of life. Yes, she said, we're ready to go home. But as they prepared to leave the hospital, Victoria knew they weren't just going home to the house that legally belonged to her. They were going home to begin the next phase of a fight that had been 23 years in the making. Marcus Sterling had underestimated her for the last time. 6 months later, Victoria Sterling stood in the kitchen of her house, making coffee in the early morning light. Through the window, she could see the construction crews working on the new playground she'd commissioned for the property. James, now crawling everywhere and pulling himself up on furniture, would need a safe place to play as he grew. The house felt like home again. All traces of Amber's brief residency had been removed and donated to charity. Marcus's personal belongings had been packed and stored in a facility downtown, waiting for him to decide what he wanted done with them from his federal prison cell. The kitchen smelled like banana bread, the recipe she'd learned from her grandmother. Eleanor had moved into the guest house permanently, claiming she wanted to be close to her grandson, but really serving as Victoria's fiercest protector and closest friend. Morning, darling, Eleanor said, entering the kitchen fully dressed despite the early hour. At 73, she maintained the schedule of someone half her age. Morning, coffee's almost ready. Victoria poured 2 cups and handed one to Eleanor. They'd developed this routine over the past 6 months. Quiet mornings before James woke up. Time to discuss the day ahead and the ongoing legal proceedings. Any word from Agent Chen about the indictments? Eleanor asked. They're finalizing the charges against the construction companies today. Marcus's testimony has been comprehensive. Victoria still had mixed feelings about Marcus's cooperation with federal investigators. His detailed confession had implicated dozens of people in the corruption network that had killed her father. But it also meant he'd received a reduced sentence of 7 years instead of the 20 he'd originally faced. 7 years. James would be 7 when his father got out of prison. And the civil suits. David says the property damages alone will come to over $200 million, plus punitive damages, plus the return of the inheritance money Marcus invested without permission. Victoria sipped her coffee, still amazed by numbers that large. We'll never have to worry about money again. Money isn't security, darling, but the knowledge that you can protect yourself and James, that's priceless. Victoria nodded, thinking about the woman she'd been 6 months ago. So afraid of being alone, so dependent on Marcus's approval, so willing to ignore red flags in exchange for the illusion of stability. That woman seemed like a stranger now. James's baby monitor crackled with the sound of him waking up, the soft cooing noises he made when he first opened his eyes. Victoria smiled and headed upstairs to get him. Good morning, sunshine, she said, lifting him from his crib. At 6 months old, James was a happy baby with her green eyes and Marcus's dark hair. He smiled constantly and had recently learned to clap his hands when he was excited. As Victoria changed his diaper and got him dressed for the day, she marveled at how natural motherhood felt. She'd been terrified during pregnancy about raising a child alone, but James made it easy. He slept well, ate enthusiastically, and seemed to find joy in everything around him. What do you think about the playground? Victoria asked him as she carried him downstairs. Too many swings or not enough swings? James babbled something that sounded like approval. Eleanor was in the living room reading financial reports when they came downstairs. She looked up and smiled at her grandson. "There's my beautiful boy," she said, taking James from Victoria's arms. "Are you ready for breakfast?" While Eleanor fed James his morning bottle. Victoria checked her phone. Messages from Rebecca about the final audit of Marcus's hidden assets. Updates from David about the ongoing civil litigation. A text from Dr. Matthews reminding her about James's 6-month checkup. And a message from an unknown number that made her pause. "This is Amber. I wanted you to know I graduated last week. Bachelor's degree in social work. Thank you for showing me that it's never too late to start over." Victoria smiled and showed the message to Eleanor. "That girl has more resilience than I gave her credit for," Eleanor said approvingly. "How is her family? Better?" Her father testified against Marcus in exchange for immunity. The construction company is clean now, and they're actually getting more business because of their reputation for honesty. Funny how telling the truth can be profitable." Victoria's phone rang. David Harrison's name on the screen. "Good morning, David." "Good morning. I have news about the final settlement negotiations." Victoria put the call on speaker so Eleanor could hear. "Marcus's legal team has accepted our terms," David continued. "Full restitution, asset forfeiture, and a permanent restraining order preventing him from contacting you or James except through court-supervised visitation after his release. And the corruption investigation, closing statements begin next week. The prosecution expects convictions on 90% of the charges. Your father's work is finally getting justice." Victoria felt tears prick her eyes. 23 years later, her father's investigation was finally complete. "There's one more thing," David said carefully. "Marcus has requested a meeting with you, supervised, at the federal facility. He wants to apologize and discuss James's future." Victoria looked at Eleanor, who was shaking her head firmly. "What do you think?" Victoria asked. "I think it's your decision," David replied diplomatically. Victoria thought about it for a long moment. She had questions for Marcus that had never been answered. About their marriage, about his choices, about what he'd really felt during the 15 years they'd spent together. But she also knew that those answers wouldn't change anything. Marcus was James's father, and someday James would have questions about him. But Victoria didn't need closure from the man who'd lied to her for 15 years. "No," she said finally. "If he wants to be part of James's life someday, he can apply for supervised visitation when he gets out of prison, but I don't owe him a conversation. I'll convey that to his attorneys," David said. "Victoria, I'm proud of you. Your father would be proud of you." After David hung up, Victoria sat in the living room watching Eleanor play with James. He was laughing at peekaboo, his whole face lighting up with joy at the simple game. "Any regrets?" Eleanor asked. Not looking up from her grandson, Victoria considered the question seriously. 6 months ago, she'd been married to a billionaire, living in luxury, protected from the harsh realities of the world by Marcus's money and power. Now she was a single mother, financially independent through her own legal battles, surrounded by people who loved her for who she was rather than what she represented. "None," Victoria said honestly. The doorbell rang. Victoria opened the door to find Rebecca standing on the porch with takeout coffee and a folder full of papers. "Final audit results," Rebecca announced, settling into the living room chair she'd claimed as her own over the past 6 months. "You're officially worth approximately $450 million. The number was so large Victoria couldn't really process it. "That seems like too much money for one person." "It's not too much money for one person who's going to spend the rest of her life making sure corruption like this never happens again," Eleanor said firmly. Victoria had been thinking about that. The money gave her options she'd never imagined having. She could start a foundation, fund investigative journalism, support other women going through similar legal battles. She could finish her father's work on a scale he'd never dreamed possible. "I've been thinking about going back to law school," Victoria said. "Not to practice traditional law, but to study criminal justice, financial crimes, victim advocacy." "That's a wonderful idea," Rebecca said. "You could do it part-time, online classes while James is young." "Eleanor could help with childcare," Victoria continued, the plan forming as she spoke. "And when James is older, he could grow up understanding that his family fights for justice." Eleanor was beaming with pride. Your grandmother and father would be so proud of the woman you've become. James chose that moment to roll over for the first time, pushing himself up on his chubby arms and looking around the room with obvious pride in his accomplishment. "Did you see that?" Victoria exclaimed, scooping him up and covering his face with kisses. "Such a smart boy." As James giggled in her arms, Victoria looked around the room at the life she'd built from the ashes of her marriage. Eleanor, loyal and loving. Rebecca, brilliant and supportive. James, perfect and innocent, depending on her to create a safe world for him to grow up in. The house that had once represented everything she'd lost now represented everything she'd gained. Not just financial security, but the knowledge that she could protect herself and her child. Not just independence, but the power to fight for other people who needed protection. Her phone buzzed with a text from David. "A city wants to name the new courthouse after your father. Thoughts?" Victoria smiled and typed back, "He'd be honored, and so am I." Outside, the construction crews were finishing the playground. Tomorrow, James would experience his first swing, his first slide, his first taste of the simple joys of childhood that Victoria was determined to protect. Marcus Sterling had tried to destroy her when he threw her out for another woman. Instead, he'd freed her to discover who she really was. A daughter worthy of her father's courage, a mother fierce enough to protect her child from anything, a woman strong enough to take everything Marcus thought he'd stolen from her and use it to build something better. 6 months ago, Victoria had been afraid of starting over at 35. Now she understood that she hadn't been starting over at all. She'd been starting, period, for the first time in her adult life, and the future looked absolutely brilliant. Victoria Sterling proved that sometimes losing everything is exactly what you need to discover who you really are. Her father would be proud of the woman she became, and her son will grow up knowing his mother never backed down from a fight for what was right. If this story of courage, justice, and unexpected strength resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever discovered that someone you trusted was hiding something life-changing from you? Share your story. This community is built on supporting each other through life's most challenging moments. And if you enjoyed Victoria's journey from victim to victor, please hit that like button to help this story reach other women who might need to hear it. Don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss these powerful stories of real people overcoming impossible situations. Your support means everything to this channel and helps us continue bringing you the stories that matter most. Until next time, remember, you're stronger than you know, braver than you feel, and more powerful than anyone who's trying to diminish you. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you in the next story.